The whole restaurant heard the man raise his hand before they saw it fall, and in the half-second between the two, exactly one person moved. Everyone else did what people do. They looked away. They found something interesting on their plates. They turned the volume of their own conversations up a notch to cover the ugliness at the corner table, the way a room full of decent people will collectively agree to unsee a thing that frightens them. It was a nice restaurant, the kind where such things were not supposed to happen, and the very niceness of it made everyone more determined to pretend it wasn't. A man was terrorizing a woman 2 tables over, and 40 diners had decided, in the silent, unanimous way of crowds, that it was not their business. One man decided otherwise. He had been sitting alone in the corner, and he set down his chopsticks, and he stood. Before I take you into what happened next in that restaurant, because the reason the entire room went silent has less to do with what this man did than with what everyone slowly realized about who he was. Stay with me. Subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. This story reaches far, and I love to see how far. The woman was called Kioma, and she had not wanted to come to dinner at all. She had come because the man across from her had insisted, and because saying no to him had become, over the months, she had known him, a thing that cost more than saying yes, and because she had told herself that in a public place, in a nice restaurant, surrounded by people, she would at least be safe from the worst of him. She had been wrong about that. She was learning, that evening, that a man like Rio did not particularly care who was watching, because he had never once, in his whole life, faced a consequence for anything he did to the people smaller than him. His name was Rio Tanaka, and he was the kind of man who was charming to everyone, except the person he had decided he owned. Kioma had met the charming version first. Everyone did. It was the door through which men like him entered your life. And then, slowly, once you were inside, the charm thinned, and the other things showed through, and by the time you understood what you were dealing with, you were already tangled in it too deeply to easily leave. The scene at the table had built the way these scenes always build. A comment. A correction. A criticism of something she had said, or worn, or done, delivered low and vicious across the white tablecloth. Kioma had tried to make herself small, to give it no fuel, which was the survival strategy she had learned, but Rio did not want smallness that evening. He wanted a reaction. He wanted, in that nice restaurant, in front of all those people, to demonstrate his total power over her, and when she would not give him the reaction he was fishing for, he escalated and escalated until his voice was loud enough that the tables nearby had gone quiet, and then he grabbed her wrist across the table, hard, and when she tried to pull away, he raised his hand. That was the moment. The raised hand. The half-second of silence. 40 people looking anywhere but at the corner table. The man from the corner reached them before the hand fell. He did not run. That was the thing several diners would remember afterward, when they tried to describe it. He crossed the restaurant with an unhurried certainty that was somehow more alarming than speed would have been, and he arrived at the corner table at exactly the right moment. And he did not touch Rio. He simply stepped into the space between the raised hand and the woman, so that if the hand came down, it would come down on him, and he looked at Rio with a stillness that had nothing in it a person could argue with. "Put your hand down," he said. Quietly, Rio, whose whole life had been built on never being interrupted, stared at him. "This is none of your, put your hand down," the man said again. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. There was something in the flat certainty of it, some weight that had nothing to do with volume, that made even Rio, Even a man who had never once been afraid in a room like this feel the ground shift slightly beneath him. Rio lowered his hand. He did not decide to. His body decided for him. In response to something his conscious mind had not yet identified, and the moment he had done it, he was furious at himself for having done it, and the fury made him stupid. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Rio said, standing up now, drawing himself to his full height, falling back on the line that had always worked. "Do you know who my family is? You just made the worst mistake of your..." "I know exactly who you are," the man said. "I know your family. I know your father. And I know what your father does. And I know that you have spent your entire life being protected from consequences by a name you did not earn. I know all of it." He let that sit for a moment, and something flickered in Rio's face. The first crack. The first hint that this was not the interaction he thought it was. "What you don't know is who I am. And I think, before this goes any further, you had better find out." The man said his name. He said it quietly, almost gently, just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, and the effect of it rippled outward through the restaurant in a way that was almost visible. A waiter, passing, stopped dead. A man at a nearby table, a businessman who had been studiously not watching, went very still and set down his glass. The name meant nothing to most of the 40 diners, but it meant everything to the ones who knew it, and the ones who knew it went pale, and their paleness spread to the ones who didn't, the way fear spreads through a room even among people who don't yet know what they're afraid of. And Rio Tanaka, who had invoked his father's name as the ultimate authority, the trump card that had never once failed him, understood in a single sickening rush that he had just played that card against a man whose name his father spoke carefully, that the family he had threatened this stranger with was a family that answered to the very man now standing between him and the woman he had been about to strike. That he had, in his drunken need to dominate a woman in a restaurant, picked a fight he could not possibly survive, with someone he should have crawled across the floor to avoid. The entire room went silent. That was the silence people would talk about. Not the silence of a room looking away, the cowardly collective silence from before. This was a different silence entirely. The silence of a room that has just understood something all at once, that has felt the balance of power in it invert so completely and so suddenly that no one dares to breathe. The man everyone had been afraid to watch, the loud, dangerous man at the corner table, had just been revealed to be nothing at all. A spoiled son hiding behind a borrowed name, and the quiet stranger who had stepped in to stop him had been revealed to be the thing the loud man was only pretending to be. Funny thing about a borrowed name, it only works until you point it at the person you borrowed it from. Rio's face had drained of everything, the swagger, the fury, the certainty, all of it gone, replaced by the specific terror of a man who has just realized exactly how far he has overreached. He started. "I didn't know it was. I didn't mean any, sit down," the man said. Rio sat. "No," the man said. "Not there. Away from her. Move to another table, and stay there, and do not speak, and do not look at her, until I decide what happens next. Do you understand?" Rio moved. This man who 2 minutes ago had raised his hand to a woman in front of 40 people now scrambled to obey a quiet instruction, gathering himself up and stumbling to a table across the room, and the sight of it, the total collapse of the bully the instant he met something that could actually stop him, was, to the diners watching, its own kind of revelation. The man turned to Kioma. His whole manner changed as he turned. The flat, dangerous certainty he had aimed at Rio softened into something careful, something almost apologetic, the register of a person aware that a frightened woman had just watched him do something frightening on her behalf, and might not yet know whether he was a rescue or simply a larger version of the thing she'd been rescued from. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Kioma was shaking. The wine had been about to spill into violence, and her body was catching up to the danger the way bodies do, late, after the moment has passed. She looked at the man in front of her, and then across the room at Rio, who was sitting where he'd been put like a scolded child, and she was trying to understand what she had just witnessed. "My wrist," she managed. No, I'm all right. I don't understand what just happened." "You're safe," the man said. "That's the part that matters, and it's the part I want you to be sure of before anything else. Whatever you're confused about, be certain of that. He won't touch you again. Not tonight. And not ever, and I don't say that lightly." His name was Sata Fujimura, and Kioma would learn the shape of who he was over the hours and days that followed, though she did not know any of it yet. She knew only that a stranger had stood up in a room full of people who wouldn't, and that his standing up had somehow reduced the man she was terrified of to a trembling wreck across the restaurant, and that he was now speaking to her with a gentleness that did not match the thing she had just seen him do. "May I sit?" Sata asked. "Only if you want me to. I understand if you'd rather I didn't. You've had 2 frightening men near you tonight, and I'm aware I might look like the second one." The fact that he asked, the fact that he named the very thing she was feeling, the fact that a man who had just made a room go silent was asking a shaking woman's permission to sit at her table, was what let her breathe out for the first time. "You can sit," she said. He sat, at a careful distance, and he did not crowd her, and he signaled quietly for water and for the manager, and he arranged, in a few low words, for Kioma to have whatever she needed, and for the evening to be smoothed over in the way that men with his kind of authority can smooth things over. And the whole time he stayed gentle and stayed back, and let her set the pace of everything. "Why did you stand up?" Kioma asked, when she could. "No one else did. 40 people and no one moved. Why you?" Sata considered the question seriously. "Because I watched it building," he said. "And I watched everyone decide not to watch it building, which is a thing people do, and I don't entirely blame them. Fear does that, and most of them were afraid, and afraid people look away. But I've spent my whole life around men like him. Men who are only brave toward people who can't fight back. I know exactly what they are, and I know exactly what they need, which is for the room to keep looking away. So I stopped looking away." He glanced across the restaurant at Rio, sitting alone and diminished. "It cost me nothing to stand up. That's the part that matters. It cost me nothing, and it cost everyone else the same nothing, and I was the only one who spent it. That's not because I'm brave. It's because I've stopped being afraid of the particular thing everyone else was afraid of." "You knew who he was," Kioma said. "You knew his family. You said his father's name like it was nothing." "His father's name is not nothing," Sata said. "But it's not what he thinks it is either. He spent his life believing that name makes him untouchable, and tonight he learned that it only makes him untouchable to people below it. There's always someone above. He just never bothered to find out where he actually stood, because no one had ever made him find out. The people he terrorizes can't. So he grew up thinking the name was a wall around him, when really it was just a wall around everyone smaller than him. The moment he pointed it at someone it didn't work on, it stopped being a wall at all. The thing about the men who hide behind borrowed power is that they never learn where it ends, because they only ever aim it downward. Aim it upward, even once, and you find out in a hurry exactly how much of it was ever really yours. Kioma looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to do something to him," she said. It was not quite a question. "Aren't you? Not just tonight." Something. Sata was quiet for a moment, and she could see him weighing his answer, choosing honesty. "I want to," he admitted. "A man who raises his hand to a woman in a restaurant is a man who does it in private constantly, and I know that, and part of me wants to make sure he never does it to anyone again." But, he looked at her carefully, "That's not my decision to make. It's yours. You're the one he's been hurting. If I decide his fate for you, without asking, then I've done a version of the same thing he does, deciding what happens to your life without your say. So, I won't. I'll tell you what I'm able to do, and how far my reach goes, and then you'll tell me what you want, and we'll do that. Not what I want, what you want. This is your life. You've had enough men run it." Kioma had not expected that. She had spent months, years, being told what would happen to her, by Rio, by the situation, by the slow narrowing of her own options. And here was a man with the power to do anything he liked, handing the decision back to her, insisting on it, refusing to take from her the one thing she had least of, which was control over her own life. "I don't want him hurt," she said slowly, testing the words, surprised to find they were true. "I thought I would. But I don't. I want him gone. I want him out of my life completely and permanently, and I want to be sure, really sure, that he can't come back, that he can't call, can't show up, can't do the thing he always does where he apologizes and it starts all over again. I don't need him punished. I need him gone. And I've never been able to make him gone, because every time I try, the name you just said out loud is the thing he uses to pull me back. His family. His reach. He always finds me. He won't anymore," Sata said. "That I can promise you completely. Making a man like that disappear from a life, permanently, so he understands there is no coming back, is entirely within what I can do. And it's the smallest thing I could do, and it happens to be exactly what you're asking for. You want him gone. I'll make him gone. Not hurt. Gone, and he'll understand why, and he'll understand who made it happen, and he'll understand that testing it would be the last thing he ever tested. That's the version you're describing, and it's yours if you want it." "I want it," Kioma said. "Then it's done," Sata said, "as of tonight." And it was. Kioma never learned all the details of how these things were handled quietly, in the world Sata moved through, but Rio Tanaka vanished from her life that night as completely as if he had never been in it. No calls, no appearances, no apologies that reopened the door. The reach she had been unable to escape was, it turned out, no reach at all against a man positioned above the family Rio had spent his life hiding behind. And once that man decided Rio was gone, Rio stayed gone. Kioma checked, for a while the way you check a wound to see if it is healed, bracing for him. He never came. The relief of it took weeks to believe and months to fully trust. And then one day she realized she had stopped bracing and understood that she was free. Sata did not make himself the answer to her freedom. That was the thing she noticed most, in the aftermath, turning the evening over in her mind. A different man, a man more like the one she'd escaped, would have used the rescue as a claim, would have positioned himself as the new authority in her life, would have turned her gratitude into an opening. Sata did none of it. He gave her his help and asked for nothing, and when the evening was over, he made sure she got home safely and left it entirely to her whether she ever saw him again. He did not call. He did not appear. He left the next move, like every move, to her. She made it, eventually, in her own time, by her own decision, once the freedom had settled into something she trusted. She sought him out. And what grew between them then grew slowly and on her terms, because he insisted on her terms. Because he had understood from the first evening that a woman who has spent years having her life run by a man does not need a kinder man to run it, but a man who will refuse to run it at all. Here is the thing that the room full of people who looked away never understood, and the thing that Sata Fujimura understood completely. Cruelty toward the powerless depends entirely on an audience that agrees to look away. The man who terrorizes a woman in a restaurant is not brave. He is a coward who has correctly calculated that everyone watching will decide it is not their business, and he is almost always right. Because fear makes cowards of decent people, and 40 decent people looking away is all the permission a bully has ever needed. It costs nothing to look away, and it costs nothing to stand up, and the only difference between the two is whether you have decided that the frightened thing in front of you is worth the small risk of being seen. Sata stood up because he had stopped being afraid of the thing everyone else feared, and in standing up he revealed the oldest truth about power, that the powerful most want hidden, that the loud man's strength was borrowed, and the quiet man's was real, and that the entire room had been afraid of exactly the wrong person. Never look away from the raised hand. And never mistake the man who needs the whole room to fear him for the man the whole room should.